India Grows at Night with Nandan Nilekani and Gurcharan Das. Gurcharan no doubt will tell us what he means by India Grows at Night while we sleep. This program is brought to you in the normal series by Aspen Institute India, but in this case with All India Management Association. Both the organizations are headed by women. Both are former colleagues of mine, so sense of great pride, of course. Now these twosome in front of you, they're an incredible twosome. So I was really wondering, how does one say anything relevant about the two of them? And I was thinking about this driving from my village in Haryana called Gurgaon, and I came up with a few different points. Both of them have a lot in common with each other. Did you guys know that? No, you're going to hear this now. Both are writers and authors. You're here to discuss Gurcharan's book, but Nandan's book is just amazing, Imagining India. And that's something that everybody, every Indian, everyone else should read. Both of them are from the private sector. We never thought the private sector people have brains. We thought private sector is all about making money. Products, services, profit, dividend. But these two guys are from the private sector, but they are thought leaders. And actually for me, they are leaders. Both of them do public service. Nandan has given up what he used to do very well for public service, and you can see from his tired eyes that he is killing himself in the government. And Gurcharan does public service through his writings, because I think he creates awareness. He makes us think and discuss and debate how India should go forward. Both of them are very articulate. Both of them have very high values and integrity. These are two incredibly high value leaders and intellectuals. And finally, both of them share a love for Kurur. Right? Both of them. I don't know whether the friendship started there, whether they walked there, but one of Gurcharan's friends from Kunur is here, Jaggi, who walks with him over there. He's come all the way from Kunur to listen to Gurcharan today. So with that, and both of them have mutual respect for each other. With that, Nandan, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Tarun. I thought you were going to call this the Tom and Jerry show, but
that too.
Well, first of all, it's really a great pleasure to be here in front of such a distinguished audience, along with my good friend Gurcharan Das. I know that Gurcharan remembers when we met, but it was at a dinner in Bangalore some 25 years back, and you've been friends ever since. So it's really a wonderful thing to be here. And I think this book to me is one of his finest books, because in some sense it brings out the evolution of Gurcharan as a thinker, as someone who's thought about the markets, the role of the state, because he was always, when earlier he meant India grows at night, he sort of said that, India grows when the government sleeps, and it was a sort of a libertarian view of the whole thing. But I think what he has done here is really taken the thinking to a whole new level, and I think made a very persuasive argument for both the government and the state. So I think this is a very important book, and as we discuss today, we'll try to bring out different nuances of the challenges of markets, states, and so forth. But I thought we'll begin by Gurcharan, talking about what is this, how is India grow at night, and you always use Gurgaon as an example of this India grows at night. Perhaps you could start off, Gurcharan?
Yeah, well, I'll just come to that, Nandan. First of all, thank you all. One could never, for a writer, this is a dream to have such a large audience here and such a distinguished audience. So, thank you for coming. there is what Nandan hinted at. Actually, at none of my book talks has this been explored, but I think you've given me a chance to really say this, that in the 60s, I was a socialist, and so were most young people at the time. And then I experienced from an insider, I experienced the pain of the license Raj. And that led me to write a book, India Unbound, where I've recounted some of these humiliating experiences that I personally had in running an organization. And I became a libertarian. I became a libertarian who believed in laissez-faire, who believed that the less the state, that the reforms were about the state moving out of the way, and therefore in that 2 decades, I celebrated the idea of India grows at night. The full sentence is India grows at night when the government sleeps. And I said, here is a country that's really risen from below. But as I was writing this book, and I will maybe I'll come back to that, because this book actually started in Egypt, in Tahrir Square, during the Arab Spring, when where the democracy movement, somebody must have read India Unbound, because they invited me to present the India model for Egypt's future. And they invited somebody from Turkey to present the Turkish model for Egypt's future. And that's the time when I realized that India grows at night was not enough, and that we can celebrate it, but then we should pause, because India must also grow during the day. And therefore this is really what I make is a liberal case for a strong state. But to answer your question, in the very first chapter, I draw a contrast between 2 towns near Delhi. So it's appropriate. We are sitting here, you're all very familiar. And both on the outskirts, one is Faridabad and one is Gurgaon. Now, 25 years ago, if you were in Delhi and you thought about the future, everybody told you, go and invest in Faridabad. That's the future. There was a industrial area. It had good connectivity. There was a railway line to Delhi. It had a municipality. It had rich agriculture. An investment was pouring in, and state government wanted to showcase it as for the future. This is the future of Haryana. But at that time, Gurgaon was a sleepy village. The soil was rocky, pitiable agriculture, and even the goats ran away. But 25 years later, Nandan, Gurgaon is the millennium city, an engine driver of India's economic growth, sort of like Bangalore, a representative of the new India. It has 32 million square feet of commercial space, which houses the world's largest corporations, 27 malls, 7 golf courses, countless sort of fabled apartment complexes which vie with the best in the world. And so the question is, and 25 years later, where is Faridabad? Faridabad has not even experienced the first drive
of modernization after 1991. It is it is still stuck in the red tape of its municipality and the corruption of its state government. And so how did this happen? Well, the disadvantage of Gurgaon turned out to be an advantage. It had no government at all. In fact, it got its municipality just 2 or 3 years ago. After it had risen and everything, they suddenly woke up. The government said, we've got to have a municipality. And it's really a tribute to the citizens who invested, who, if there was no water, they dug bore wells. Since the electricity board didn't give them enough electricity, they put their generating sets. Since the police didn't show up, they got private security guards. I mean, the MTNL didn't give them connections, so they used cell phones. So, and since school teachers didn't come to the government primary schools, they started private schools. Even in the slums of Gurgaon, their private schools would charge 200 rupees a month. Similarly with health clinics. So here's a story of a rise from below. Now, before we go too much gaga over this, and the IT industry is a similar story of that. And in fact, Gurgaon is India, or India is Gurgaon writ large, which is the new India. Gurgaon, the new India is that. And the question is what I asked earlier, but shouldn't Gurgaon, also grow during the day, and which means that people of Gurgaon would be much happier with a civic infrastructure, with roads without potted, holes in them, with pavements, with parks, with electricity, with water, with all the things that we expect from a city. And so, the fact is that both Gurgaon and Faridabad are not the right models for India's future. We don't want Faridabad because Faridabad represents red tape and corruption. But we also, I think partly this recent slowdown is an example of India hitting that wall of governance. And so really what we seek today as a country, more than even economic reforms, are governance reforms. How can we have functioning services? And the services, the most essential ones, are related to governance. Why should it take us 10 years, 12 years to build a road? You know this from Bangalore. When other countries take 2-3 years. Why should it take us 15 years to get justice from our courts? I mean, look here, all this noise and everything with Raja, Kalmadi and all that, and the trials haven't even started. And on the other side, you have example 2 weeks ago of Rajat Gupta, where he has been convicted, sentenced, and there was investigation. There was a huge amount of work put in, but within 2 years, everything was done. And so that's why, in a sense, I wrote India Grows at Night, because I wanted to make a case for a strong liberal state. Now, a strong liberal, don't get the wrong idea. Strong state, I'm not thinking about Mao's China or even Deng's China, nor even benign Singapore, which has enviable levels of governance. I'm thinking of the state which was in the minds of our constitution makers. When they wrote our constitution, it's the state which was in the minds of the liberal thinkers who thought about this state, the American founding fathers, the same kind of state. And now what is that state? That state has three pillars. One, it has an executive that is capable of quick, decisive, determined action when needed. And that action, number two pillar, that action is bounded by the rule of law. And third, it's accountable to the people. Now, it's not easy. We are seeing this partly even in the United States right now, that there is this gridlock. Obama is extremely weak when it comes to solving the real problems of the United States, their deficit. And the reason why it's difficult is also because some of these pillars, they don't reinforce each other. They act against each other. You've seen the Anna Hazare movement for accountability has actually weakened the state even more. Whether today the Babu won't even put his signature on any piece of paper. So the question then is, how will this happen?
Sure. Yeah, but I think it's all in how will it happen. But one thing that I wanted to understand, because as I said, when I read the book, I realized that you had sort of moved your position on libertarianism in the state and all that. Is how I mean, first of all, how do you make it happen? I mean, that's the question. Because ultimately, let's take markets and what's happened in India in the markets. I mean, all reforms happen when people are dissatisfied with the current state of affairs. I mean, that's when enough energy is unleashed to bring about a change. And
right.
You can think, and 1991 sort of gained legitimacy because it unleashed, people, it unleashed their aspirations, it unleashed entrepreneurship and all that. And I think for the first 10 years of that period, the kind of capitalism or market economy was an inclusive kind of a thing, because it was driven by industries like technology and financial service and others. We are about, run companies, professional corporate governance and all that. But in some sense, if you look at the last 10 years, the markets have been driven by far more extractive kind of models.
Yeah.
And you've seen the rise of crony capitalism, and a big part of people's dissatisfaction is the notion that state assets are being given away on the cheap to undeserving people. So the risk here is that while that is one aspect of it, I mean, there's a sort of a good capitalism which is inclusive and a bad capitalism which is extractive. If you don't distinguish between the two, then the events of today have the potential of saying all markets are bad.
Right.
And in fact, that seems to be the theme, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think enough is being done? Because are the so-called good capitalists speaking up and saying it's very important that this bad form of capitalism is shut down? Because otherwise the whole game is over. Because if people become disenchanted with markets and entrepreneurship,
you're absolutely right.
Then the whole thing, your liberal state will go somewhere else.
The first decade after the reforms was a period when we actually had very slow, but we actually had reforms through all the governments up to 2004. You had in the Devagowda government, you had Chidambaram's 1997 great budget, which was such a reformist budget. And so you had these very slow, painfully slow reforms, but they all moved. Then after 2004, really the reforms stopped in effect. And if we had continued the reforms, that second generation of reforms of mining, for example, where a lot of crony capitalism today is showing up. Now, whether it's Colgate or whether it's Madhu Koda, and whether it's the Reddy brothers, this whole area of mining has not been reformed, and you could have, reforms would have created a transparent system whereby to begin with, you would, I won't go into the details of it, but you could have the whole idea, whether it's an auction or whatever, but there would have been a transparent system. And similarly, real estate. Real estate is a sector that's not been reformed, and it's not very difficult, actually. Other countries have done it, where you don't have this gap between the market rate and the circle rate. So easy to equalize. But these were the reforms that were needed. So the answer is not less reform, but more reform.
No, I understand that. But the concern that I'm trying to articulate from you, get from you is, has the, as I said, there's a form of capitalism which is,
yes,
follows the rules, inclusive, innovative, all that.
Correct.
And there's another form of capitalism, extractive, and which leads to cronyism.
Yeah.
Now, since the cronyism sort of form of capitalism seems to be the dominant metaphor in everybody's mind, is there the risk that this will disenchant people with the whole idea of markets and actually go back to a regime that you said we came out of, which is the license permit?
And I think part of the failure here is a failure that our reformers did not actually sell the reforms. The point you're making is there's a difference between being pro-market and pro-business. Pro-market means you stand for a rules-based capitalism. Pro-business often becomes crony capitalism. And the fact is, Margaret Thatcher used to say that she used to spend she spent 20% of her time doing the reforms, but 80% selling the reforms. Now, if I were Manmohan Singh or any of our reformers, I'd be out there on television making this distinction that when you're pro-market, what you stand for are competitive markets which are in fact create reduce price, lower costs, lower prices, improve quality product, and help the Aam Aadmi, and that's being inclusive. Because they did not make this distinction, because they did not do the second generation of reforms, we are in this particular situation that we are.
So where do you go from here?
Where do we go from here is the question that I'd like to, but before I come to that, Nandan, I would like to take, you see, we have to understand also who we are. Who we are as India. And I've devoted, as you know, quite a bit of this book in trying to answer that question, who we are. And how is it that India had a bottom-up success, whereas China had a top-down success? I have a Chinese friend, and he's an amazing fellow because he made a huge amount of money, and then he made the mistake of not sharing it with the party bosses in his distant province that he was from. And they tried to grab that money, and when he discovered that they were going to grab his money, he spirited that money out of China, and $250 million he got out, and they did not forgive him, and he had to run for his life, so he came out of China. And today he invests his money in India. He really believes, after this experience, he really believes that this is the place, this is the future. And so one day he came to my house and he was complaining of a backache, and I said, what happened? And he said, he had been looking at investment possibilities, and he's been looking at some factories in Haryana, and he had gone to some small towns, and he said, with roads like these, I said, with infrastructure like this, how did you become the second fastest growing economy in the world? So I told him about India grows at night, story. And then he thought for a while, and he said, you mean India has risen You mean India has risen with one hand tied behind its back? And I nodded. And then he said, what if that second hand got untied? He said, this must be the nightmare of the Chinese leadership, that you would be absolutely formidable as a country. As it is, you already became the second fastest. And, the mistake we make is to think that the race between China is as to who will get rich first. Well, both countries will turn middle class. China is ahead of us and they will remain ahead, but they will both become middle class. The race really is as to who will fix its government first. If India fixes its governance before China fixes its politics, India will win the race. If China fixes its politics before India fixes its governance, then China will win the race. Now India has liberty and China has governance. And you need both. You need law and order, as the TV show says. We have laws, they have order. And you need both. And so I think that's really a very critical part of understanding that the issue going forward, I don't think is the economic issue anymore. I think even with these reforms at this snail's pace, we are going to become a middle class country. We are already 1/3 middle class. There are various estimates, between 25% and 1/3. And China is 50% middle class.
No, but my point was that, do you run the risk of running aground because disenchantment with markets because of this cronyism?
Yeah.
If the public mood gets disenchanted with the whole market economy and all that, then unless you have public support for reforms, you won't get that.
Yeah.
And my point is that that's one aspect, which is that that unless you categorically put that out of the way, then you'll always have that issue. But the other thing is that you say your argument is that they should have been sold in a more forceful manner. But it appears to me, and after having been in the system now, I think the reform of the markets, 91, essentially created opportunity and choice for the middle class or the emerging middle class, right? I mean, in those days, it took you 2 years to get a phone or a car or whatever, and all that got opened up. But because public service delivery, the stuff that delivered schooling and health and education, all those things,
water, roads,
and to the people who depended most on the state, which is the poor,
right.
Since that didn't change much,
Right.
they never saw any great upside in this reform story.
Correct.
So it appears to me that unless you bring them on board,
Yeah.
and therefore those reforms are as much, as important if you really want to create a constancy for reforms.
So you're absolutely right that when I say it's the issue, the big issue tomorrow is not the economy, because I think I personally think this present the present moment when we have got this 5.5% staring at us, and we have dropped 3 percentage points. By the way, China has also dropped exactly 3 percentage points. But 3 percentage points in India, I don't know about in China also, but in India 1 percentage point is 1.5 million new jobs. Jobs that are lost when you drop, and jobs that are created when you grow. And each 1.5 million means it supports 5 people. So you got 7.5 million people. Plus it creates 3 indirect jobs. So you can see a huge multiplier. So there's a lot of pain right now. And I don't discount that. But I do believe that with the current momentum and with the current reforms and with the current slow pace of reform, we will go, by 2030, we will be a middle income economy. We will double per capita income every 10 years. And the problem is then, both for India and China. India will be at $5,000-6,000 per capita income. China will be at $12,000 per capita income. But both will get stuck in the middle income trap. We believe our destiny is $40,000 per year, the US per capita income. We will get there. Chinese also believe that, by the way, more than us, in fact. But they are not. And middle income trap is something the economists have told us have studied, because it happened in Latin America. And the Latin American countries, for the same reasons of governance, got stuck for 2-3 decades before they could recover. So what I'm trying to say is, to become inclusive, I think the poor are not going to be disenchanted with the reform story. The poor want governance. They want delivery of water, of schools. And that is an issue of governance. And it's not related necessarily. It's not a failure of the reforms. You need both. And frankly, that kind, for me, is where we are. So before, we go into like what is the answer, Nandan, I just want to continue with a couple of more thoughts about who we are. So one was the mistake we made about China and India. The other mistake we make is to believe that the weakness we feel we suffer in the state, this weakness is a recent phenomena. We think, oh, because we have a weak prime minister. We say, oh, because we have a gridlock in parliament. Oh, because we have coalition politics. Now, all these things are also true. But the fact is that India has always been a historically weak state and a strong society, whereas China has been a strong state and a weak society. And you need both. You need strong states and you need strong societies to make those states accountable. In India, the Indian has always been defined by his village, his caste, his joint family. The Chinese has always been defined by the state. The India's history was a history of competing kingdoms, political disunity. China's history is a history of empires. In fact, we had 4 empires in our history, and the Maurya, Gupta, Mughal and British. All these 4 empires were weaker than the weakest Chinese empire. And so India, for example, the law in China, the emperor gave the law and then he interpreted the law. In India, from very early on, from the time of Magadha, our first major state, from the Magadha's time, 5th century BC, the king, the law preceded the king. Law meaning dharma. And the job of the king was to uphold dharma. And the interpreter of the law in China was the emperor. The interpreter of the law in India was the Brahmin. So very early we created a weakness, in our weakness meaning a very liberal distribution of power in our state. And so you, in India, in China, oppression came from the state, from the emperor and the mandarins. In India, oppression came from society. And the answer to that oppression was the Buddha, the spiritual entrepreneur, the guru. And anyway, I could go on and on. But essential seed of the idea is that Indians are accumulators and Chinese are assimilators, which means that our history, both the history of India and China, was people by people from Central Asia as they came in migrations to both these places. In China, China assimilated them into one melting pot, one Han identity. In India, we created 2,200 subcastes, jatis. And so if China is a soup or a melting pot, India is a salad, you know, with its different vegetables, you can see them, and you can see the different Rajputs, Jats, and so on, different things. So I think this is important when we discuss what is to be done, because we have to understand who we are, and we have to be true to our nature. We are not ever going to become like the Chinese state. And so no wonder in 1947 we became a democracy. I think we couldn't have become. And no wonder today we are growing from below and China is growing from above.
But, to go back, if your thesis is that there's a structural weakness of the Indian state for, thousands of years, and now we need a strong state.
Yeah.
So are you suggesting that you'll have something which is different from what's happened all these years, or your very vision of that strong state is something which is designed for that Indian ethos?
Right. Well, that's the heart of the question.
Yeah.
And the Anna Hazare movement today is a collision, classical collision of a weak state with a strong society. And the way the state has responded to the Anna Hazare movement is just amazing. I think the hope, look, a democracy like India, I don't believe history is destiny. India has shown a remarkable ability to come up with solutions. It has shown a remarkable ability to assimilate new ideas and make them its own. So I don't believe that just because we've been historically a weak state, we are condemned to be a weak state. Maybe I should use the word effective, because people take the word strong in a very negative sort of way, but that we are condemned to be an ineffective state. No, I don't think so. I think that India too, in its time, has had strong. Indira Gandhi was a very strong ruler. Unfortunately, she was not a reformer. She was not a builder of institutions. She was a destroyer of institutions. So that's not the kind of leader we would want. So if we're lucky, we could have a strong leader who's also a reformer. But in a democracy, you can't depend on that. So where is the hope in all this? And I think that the hope is in the much reviled middle class of India. I've just come from recording a very frustrating program on NDTV where Mani Shankar Iyer was holding forth as to how terrible is this middle class. He every word, every swear word that he could utter, he uttered against the middle class. But then he confessed that, look, I'm a Marxist. So that's how I look at the thing. And the fact is that today, India's middle class was 2% in 1950. It was 8% in 1980. It is about 35% today. Now, there are various counts. NCAR numbers are different from other numbers, but between you can draw the line anywhere. But about a quarter to a third of India is middle class today. And if we grow at 8%, in 10 years it will be 50%. China is already 50%. We'll also be 50%. Just the thing. Now, the reason where I don't agree with the kind of self-hatred that Mani Shankar Iyer was expressing about the middle class was that I think this is an aspirational class. And middle classes do make history. And I think this Anna Hazare movement, whether it survives or dies, it has served one historic purpose. It has awakened the middle class. Now that awakening may have begun a bit earlier, maybe with the Jessica Lal murder and the engagement of the middle class through social media, etc. But now, and I don't think that this is the, I'm not suggesting that Anna Hazare movement is the answer, because protests will wake you up, but they don't solve the problem. But there is an awakening. There's no question about that. But there's a great gap between awakening and action. And what you have to do, the hard work of, and it's the hard work of politics that is now needed. It's the hard work of politics. And so, have we gone over our time? Just check, is that what he's telling us?
Okay.
Okay. All right.
Something like that.
We have to control ourselves. Well, we can answer some of these questions.
Maybe one last question, Gurcharan, and then maybe we'll throw it open.
Yeah.
You know, I think you raise a very important concept of having a sort of a moral framework for doing this, and you have dug deep into the Indian tradition to come up with a moral framework which seems to bridge the religious secular kind of thing and do that. Could you just maybe briefly talk about that, and then we can throw it open.
Okay. Well, one of the ideas that I throw up here is that many nations have a key word, which is like a key that unlocks the secrets of the nation. Now, for America, that key word is liberty. And all the good and bad things, including the Tea Party movement, are driven by liberty. France, the key word would be égalité. And they will pass the most crazy laws in France in the name of equality. Now, I believe that the key word for India is actually dharma. And dharma is in the sense that Mahatma Gandhi used it during the freedom struggle to fight untouchability. This sadharan dharma. Not swadharma, which is your caste dharma, but that universal dharma, ahimsa, satya. What dharma attracted the Buddha, attracted Ashoka, and attracted our constitution makers, who put the wheel of dharma in the middle of our flag, the Ashok Chakra, to remind us the notion of public dharma, doing the right thing. Now, one of the problems is that, I think one of the problems in why we face this deficit of governance and deficit of the rule of law right now and corruption is that nobody translated the wonderful ideals of our constitution into the language that people understood, as Gandhi had understood and done it with sadharan dharma. And that's one of the things, one of the things I've recommended in this book is a political party. So we can talk about that. But one of the things this party should do is to translate. The job of politicians is that. So that's kind of captures the idea.
Maybe I think we've had a good discussion. I'd now like to throw it open for questions. You can just introduce yourself and keep it crisp. We don't need a long...
My question is, we agreed one point, how to go for. Now let us forget about China and other things. We have learned from them a lot of lessons. What is good governance? And the second is the good, strong society. Strong society is going to come up with this Anna Hazare movement, Kejriwal movement. It's a chain reaction. It is going to start now. You cannot stop it. Now, good governance. The British time, they had made a bureaucrat and politician. If the bureaucrats stick to their gun and they don't allow these netas to carry on the
Can
things,
you come quickly to the
there will be a definite improvement in the administration. But when this bureaucrat and politician nexus starts, that is the danger of. So how you think about the governance to improve?
Yeah. Well, that's the central question that I raise, that what are the kind of reforms that we need? And one of the reforms which we talk about, well, we need reforms of the administration, the bureaucracy. This business of seniority is one of the most insidious things that's practiced in India. It was not practiced during the British times. You could an outstanding officer could supersede other officers all the time, and a secretary to the government was made at the age of 40. You know, at the age of 40, if you didn't become secretary, you would not become secretary to the government of India. So these are some of the institutions, the way our institutions have frayed, and bureaucracy, judiciary, and we talked already, the whole problem of judicial delay. The police, today the police is a handmaiden of the chief minister in any state. The independence of the police is there. Anyway, the answers to these are all there in our in the reports. Each area, there are very good reports which tell you this is what you need to do. Question is, who will do it?
Yeah, I think this lady. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Gurcharan, for a great talk. Shahana Basu Kanodia. And the question I have, that one of the similarities between India and China is that the states in India and the provinces in China are extremely powerful. And that's the unit at which a lot of the reforms actually happen. And one of the ideas is that if you could, in terms of the how, if you could actually have more competition amongst the states in India about good governance, and then hold them up as models, or what is attracting investment, how these states are going out doing investor meets, getting job creation done, and promote that so that their own civil society in the states would put pressure on their governments and elect governments that actually practice good governance.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's in
No,
terms of the
and
how,
that's
and just
that
to get
is
your
actually you're
reaction to
returning
that.
back to the old India of competing kingdoms and having, and that's been happening. I mean, in the last 2 decades, you've had one of the best things that's been happening is the action is at the state level, and state chief ministers who are delivering good governance are getting investments versus those who are not. And that's a very important divide. And this is the new federalism that you're talking about is really the word I mean is new federalism. And today, actually, there is the state chief minister is more like a president. Unlike in the center, where he's a prime minister, the primus inter pares, the state chief ministers are presidential. And so the issue is, so their issue there is not the strong idea, the idea of a strong executive. There you have to have those other reforms, which I'll talk about. But the germ of your idea is right.
Yeah. You had a point, your question or something?
India has a very young population. Most of the people are very young. My question is a hypothetical one, but what in your belief or guess is that if you were to ask a question of the rural folks, of the urban folks, of the bureaucracy and the politicians, and say that is there a price tag at which they would prefer or they would not mind going to jail for a year, would that come out to be a very large number? If so, what kind of percentage?
I don't think anybody wants to go to jail.
No, I certainly don't want to go to jail. One thing, I think Ashok, Dr. Ashok Gulati.
Gurcharan, as always, wonderful book and compliments on that. The question of India and China. You are saying India grew from the bottom and China came from the top. Politically, perhaps you are looking at. Look at economic reforms. China started off reforms from the bottom, that is agriculture. 78 to 84, farm incomes were growing at 14 to 15% per annum. That is what they changed the whole system. And that is what gave the credibility of reforms to the masses. And then they entered, because that class demanded commodities which were being produced by town and village enterprises. That's how the Industrial Revolution came. They are still struggling to come to the services sector. We started from where? The IT, the telecom, coming from the top. and after 10 years, 15 years of struggle, we are still in the manufacturing sector so shaky. And where is agriculture? And that's when your 70% of the people find no benefit from these reforms. They are challenging those reforms. So you are looking politically, I'm looking at the economic process of change. Governance in this country will be a dream. I wish that you have told governance was always weak, state was weak, and the society was right. If we had taken the right path of reforms, this country would have been a different.
You make a very good point. One of the areas that's incomplete of reforms is agriculture, and clearly there are education is an area that needs to be reformed as well. So this whole second generation reforms we talk about are the ones. My point when I say it's Chinese is top down is because an amazing technocratic elite has created just remarkable infrastructure that, my God, no nation has ever done that, and so in such a short time. So it's been driven, and their strong suit has been governance.
Sure. You had a question? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Das, for your talk. My name is Malika Aluwalia. My question is that I tend to be of the view that corruption in our society is mostly a reflection of values held by the large majority of people, that it's not just a small set of people in government driving the corruption. Now, the thesis for your book seems to be that the economic reforms in India, the growth in India happened from bottom up, right? It happened from the people. Yet in the course of this talk, I seem to be getting the impression that you're suggesting governance reform has to come from the state, not from the society. So I guess I view this as a slight contradiction where if the value held in society is one that's not driving towards this reform, how do you...
No, this is a very good question. And I think that to some extent both of us are right. That you're talking about culture and values, and I'm talking about institutions. But I feel that if you fix the institution, you very quickly change those values. The same Indian who crosses the immigration line at Heathrow Airport, he will stop at the red light, he will pay his taxes, he will do all the high things because institutions demand it. Same culture, but it's changed overnight. And so you find really that to blame the whole thing on culture doesn't take you very far. But institutions, if you reform and they send the right signals to people that they should pay their taxes, by God, if you don't pay your taxes in America, what happens to you? You're very quickly in very serious trouble. So that's the point.
I think this gentleman has been putting up his hand, yeah.
My name is Hari Jagwani. Sir, my question is India suffering because of too much of democracy? Whether it is a good governance, or it is the growth, or it is the society? Thank you.
Well, it's tempting sometimes to believe that. And clearly democracy extracts a price. You have too many voices. In another, China, when it allowed FDI in retail, it happened in one day in 1992. Somebody just signed a paper and it was done. Here, we are still going through the whole thing. So you're right.
I think Mr. Neotia at the back.
I'm Suresh Nevetia. My question is this word reform. Now people believe that economic reform is the only reform. We are never, the Prime Minister started reform process. It's not governance reform, it's not judicial reform, it is not electoral reform, it is not police reform. Actually, what does this economic reform means if these reforms are not met?
I agree with you, Suresh. I totally agree with you. That's the thrust of my book is precisely to take this argument forward. More.
Yeah. No, I'll Arvind.
My question is, what all is, you say Gurgaon as one of the examples, and India grows at night, and what all is right probably happens at night. But I somewhere feel what all is wrong with India is also showcased by Gurgaon. There is absolutely no roads, as you said. All security which the state should provide is in the night. So, do we not have a daytime story at all?
Well, I mean, that's
Daytime story.
that's partly what what I'm arguing, that Gurgaon deserves better. Its citizens would be far happier if they had all these services.
Divya?
Mr. Das, I'm going to challenge you a bit more on the issue that the gentleman here brought up with regards to reforms and the bottom-up and top-down approach. You mentioned when the lady there said that it's desirable to have competition among states. You said that that indeed is
we do
true,
have, yeah, that's
and that
what's
the states
happening.
that have done well have in fact gotten more investment. But what I hear in that statement is again a certain almost blind faith in this GDP growth model again, and my question is that, in town after town, village after village, I'm a development practitioner and journalist, what my reporting has told me is that the people on the ground don't want investment. They want health and education, they want basic dignity, they want their laws to work, and when will the Indian state de-link basic public services and public goods from international financial markets and the growth model, the GDP growth model?
Growth is not everything, but you cannot even begin unless you have growth. In other words, if you want to reduce poverty in the country, you have to have growth. In the period between 1950 and 1980, we hardly made a dent on poverty. And yet, but after 1985 or so, when the Rajiv Gandhi's first reforms began, in these 25, Suresh Tendulkar, he is now not alive, but he wrote a very important paper in which he showed that basically 1% of Indians have been crossing the poverty line every year for the last 25 years because of growth, primarily because of growth. That's happened. Now, the point is, it's not enough. Growth is a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition. It's a necessary condition because you say these people don't want growth. Well, if you don't have growth, then you don't have jobs. Yeah, if you don't have investment, if you don't have investment, then you don't have growth, then you don't have jobs. The only way you will get jobs is through investment. So don't knock it. Don't throw the baby with the bathwater. Yes, we need education, we need health and all that, but nothing will happen unless you have growth.
Great. One question. The lady back there has been raising her hand.
Yeah, hi, I'm Deepanjali from Bangalore. I was formerly a business journalist and now a communication professional. Have also worked in the development sector and in the private sector. Found your talk really interesting. My question, in a sense, connects with what the lady here had asked about the strength of the society in India. To me, as someone who always gets moved every time our national anthem is sung, and I believe so strongly in this unity and diversity, I see there's far too much diversity happening right now. It is just like a circus, You have this caste group, this religious group. Would you still say that it's a strength, or do you think that that is the one thing that's actually bringing us down, that we do not have a cohesive identity like the Chinese, which, as much as people may look at it critically, is actually a big strength because they're able to drive through reform?
That's how we are.
So can it not be changed?
In other words, we are a plural, diverse society, and the question that we should ask is, why does a country which has religious tolerance, religious freedom, political freedom, why does it have such a hard time giving economic freedom to its people? And why is reform done by stealth? The other question.
No, now we're going to your previous book, Gurcharan.
No, I'm sorry to add to the question, but would you not say that, for example, in a state like Kerala, I'm native to Kerala, so I know this, that because they had the communist movement, they got a sense of cohesion in a society, and which helped them achieve certain human development goals, which have not been achieved by any other state in India to that extent, So would you not say that that's a good model then to follow for the rest of India, even if it's for, say, 20 years?
If you ask a mother in Kerala, she doesn't want her children, when they reach the age of 20, to go away, because there are not enough jobs in Kerala.
That too. That's a different matter, but the social issue is what I was talking about. Anyway, thank you.
That's why she's in Delhi.
Every Keralite is outside of Kerala.
That's a joke. Wait, sorry. Sunil, you had...
That was unfair. That was unfair. Sorry.
Sunil.
Gurcharan, I was just, I think I've seen to enough talks where we get into a great discussion at a macro level. And I think India has reached a stage now where in companies, what do we do at a micro level and what do we do at a macro level? And the niceties of the macro level is there's generally very little debate about what we should do and what we shouldn't do. I wrote an article recently in the Times of India where I said why a Mayawati will never win in Bengal and why a Mamta will never win in UP. And in spite of all the stuff that we talk about, we were very upset with Mayawati's 1,000 rupee notes. I'll just finish around the garland and everything else. But when I traveled in UP, what she had very well done was the Evita Peron story. I mean, the actual issue in UP was not economic. It was social. It was the class which was backward was not allowed to come up. And they said that we have to make you look rich for you to fight with the rich. Right. And therefore she won elections in spite of Delhi and Bombay and everybody else feeling, oh, what is Mayawati doing getting all these garlands? And today, I'll just go back, I went to UP recently and all the parks she's created, which we've all criticized, and I was criticizing it from Bombay till I went and saw it. It's absolutely amazing because what she has prevented is anyone else coming in and bringing in high stories and multi-storied buildings. And Lucknow today is really appreciating what they've got. So I think if you noticed in board meetings, and this is, I'm not being facetious, what gets passed very quickly are stuff which the board doesn't understand. And the moment you bring in a subject that the board understands, then everybody gets into a major chaotic scene. IT progressed because India didn't understand IT. So whatever reforms you wanted to bring in, no parliamentarian got up and said, I don't think this is a good idea, why are you giving them a tax benefit? Well, because they didn't know what the hell was going on. You bring in FDI and retail, now they know that the retailer next door, oh boy, we're going to make a racket about it. So is it to transfer all these things, which Nandan was asking, where do we go? Transfer it to the states. That all the stuff like FDI and retail, X, Y, Z, now each state, I mean, although in the center we've been trying to say it, this is not the center's job. Center will now look at stuff which most people don't understand, let parliament debate it, because they're the big moves. Yeah. I'm going to create roads all over India. Now who's going to get up and say don't do it, So I'm just saying that the low-hanging fruit is very important.
This is precisely actually what I have
last couple of questions,
advocated, which is that really not just the new federalism, but really go down to the Gram Sabha. One of the best ideas Kejriwal has been talking about is the Mohalla Sabha, the Gram Sabha, and let me just make that one point which I had not made earlier, which is 1 hour per week. I think the answer, we didn't actually discuss the solutions, but one of the solutions really comes from perhaps the best book written on democracy by a man called Tocqueville, Democracy in America, came out in the 1830s. And the genius, he says, of a democracy lies in habits of the heart. So when we were talking earlier about dharma, is translating the constitution into the habits of the heart. And it is through the Gram Sabha, the Mohalla Sabha, the spending 1 hour per week, this new middle class, if everyone spent 1 hour a week on your neighborhood, just don't solve the corruption of Kalmadi and Raja, just solve it right there in your own neighborhood. That is really one of the real answers, which is what your micro idea.
Okay, I think we have time for just 2 more questions and then I'll sum up and then ask Tarun to come and do the, the gentleman there.
Thank you. What is your view, Mr. Gurcharan Das, on federalism? Because what you have said is that chief ministers have become presidents. On the other hand, we know that the identity of states in India, of many of them, is weak. Many states want to break up, or at least people in these states would like to have smaller states. And India historically has had a bewildering variety of states. So where do you think that is going? And when you said you want a strong or an effective central state, right, what role do you see for federalism? Thanks.
Yeah, I think this is a very important, I mean, it will take me a little time, and I don't know whether we have the time, but this is something that I have discussed, how the new federalism will emerge and what exactly the questions that you have asked. I just don't think I have the time to, maybe after it's
buy the
over,
book and read it.
We'll take it offline, or buy the book, yes.
Yeah. Okay, last question I'll ask Anupam, you had something.
Okay, I think you've been very careful in not presenting any silver bullets, yes, even though you've been pressed hard to what to go forward. But you came awfully close when you say fix the institutions. Yeah. However, there's enough literature now, enough research which says institutions are outcomes of strategic bargaining conflicts. We know in India that we have a very lopsided and screwed up distribution of power. The reason the Chinese were able to do what they did, because they destroyed the existing order and did more. That is why, incidentally, they were able to do in a decentralized way what many people think they did in a centralized way. Just to make that illustration, give your example. You know, in China, all through the 80s, spent most of my career at that time when they were in a similar state, and incidentally the debates were very similar, whether it was on power or anything. You would think that the Chinese were signing a reform, whether it's retail, FDI, or whatever. What was typically happening was, when central government would tell people outside, we are going to be doing this. The state, when you went to the state, would tell us, oh, what do you mean? We have done it, we are doing it. We're not planning to do it, we're doing it. But you went down to the districts, they say, what is this? They don't know anything. We have already done it. And look, here's the result. So most of the reforms in China were actually bottom up.
Right. Well, that's a very, very good point. And I think it's something that's not appreciated enough. And also another speaker was referring to that. Nandan, one of the solutions, in fact, is a question that I want to put to you before we close. And that is a solution really is technology. And how e-governance and things like the UID and cash transfers, conditional cash transfers, as Brazil has done, can make the state more efficient and release resources which are now being spent on managing PDS, etc., to governance questions. Having better courts, more judges, and
Oh, I think absolutely. I think the thing is that whenever you have large number of repeatable transactions between the state and the citizenry, then those transactions are amenable to a much more streamlined way of interaction. And just to give an example, let's take what we have done in terms of social programs is where we increase the interaction between the individual and the state. Just take one program like Janani Suraksha Yojana, which gives, which encourages women to come for a delivery. They make, say, 4 connects with the state, and you have 25 million pregnant women every year. That means 100 million or 10 crore interactions. And if those interactions can be streamlined, they are repeatable, we can predict what the interactions are, then you can change the relationship between the individual and the state. So I think there's absolutely a role for technology, UID and all these things in there. But I think, there's this whole concept of policy windows, and policy windows is that you need the confluence of 3 things. You need this is, John Kingdon and all that you need to have, because there's so many competing ideas for reform, right? That idea has to be matched with a solution or a policy, and then you need the political climate to be there to make that policy happen. I mean, RTI is a good example. There was a need, there was a solution, and there was political energy to pass the laws. Or the reforms of the stock markets of the 90s was another example. The whole scams. So again, there was a need, there was a solution, which was setting up stock exchanges and SEBI and all that, and there was political energy behind it. So I think to have the reforms, you need all these three things coming together: the problem, stated problem, a solution, and political energy. And I'm hoping that some of that will happen. But I think the important thing, as I said, is in some sense the evolution of Gurcharan Das as a thinker, intellectual, and for someone who began essentially because of his own personal experience with the state and the license permit Raj, taking a very libertarian view of how India should progress to a point where he's also come to the conviction that it's not just about having market, but having a framework, a rule of law, a quick decision making, of accountability, and that's how you sort of combine the best of the state and the best of the market. So I think this book is a very important book in that context, and I would urge you all to read it.
And in closing, I would just like to, because I began by telling you that the book began in Tahrir Square, and let me just say that the Egyptians asked me 3 questions, and they shook me up. And actually, they propelled me to write this book. The first question they asked was, how did you keep the generals out of power? And I said that, no one in India has asked this question for 65 years.
Ask General Prakash Menon that.
And they said, you mean, my God, you've come a long way. That was because that's on the minds of every emerging democracy. The second question they asked was, they said that, look, 11% of Egypt is Christian, Coptic Christian, and 13% of India is Muslim. We believe, they said, that the Muslims in India feel secure, whereas the Christians of Egypt feel insecure. So tell us, how did you do it? That why is it the Muslims of India, the least Islamicized or fundamentalized Muslims of any country? And again, it put me, because here I was thinking of Gujarat 2002, I thought of the Sikh riots of 1984, and these people are calling India the most secular model of secularism. And the third question they asked was, how did you get that outsourcing business and become a fast-growing economy so that we can also do? These questions made me realize, because that day that they asked these questions, there was a protest in Tahrir Square. There's a whole story, by the way, connected with it, in which I got involved. But the long and short of it, I don't want to extend this idea as a story further, but it made me realize that these people who were comparing Anna Hazare and Jantar Mantar on the same day, it was the same day, by the way, the first fast of Anna Hazare, to Arab Spring, had it so wrong. And it made me realize how far we have come. We have become, we are a democracy, a secular democracy. We have kept the generals out of power. We have become the second fastest growing economy in the world. And now our job is to fix governance. And it just gave perspective to where one needs to go. And when they ask me, what's the most important thing that you have to remember to become democratic, if you had to choose one thing? And I said, the rule of law. Democracy means elections, free press, religious freedom, equality, liberty, all these things. But if you don't have the rule of law, then somebody like Mubarak will think he's above the rule of law. And a corrupt person in India believes he's above the rule of law. And so that's why we need to focus.
Great. I think that's a great way to end. I think, Tarun, we want to wrap up.
No need to sum up. I think those 3 questions were a great way to end. I still believe that we have a great future in India. Thank you both. And Gurcharan, I think you have to stay till midnight signing books.
I reserve the right to have the first book signed because I'm on the stage with you. No, it's pleasure.